I know this was a tough week with JP Morgan, a lot of people out for that. But thank you all for coming tonight. One quick few housekeeping things. One is we'd like to thank our sponsors, which is Mish Bio and Ann Arbor Spark for helping us out. And if you're interested in sponsorship, by all means, contact anyone with the green borders around the badges. If you could go ahead and advance the slide for me. There's a list of the people who are on that steering committee. Let us know, and we'd be happy to talk to you about sponsorship. Another housekeeping note is that there will not be a next meeting. The next one will be the 14th, and it will be about new strategies in a challenging regulatory environment. So for those of you who have regulatory issues or have to get regulatory approval with your products, it'd be a great meeting to talk to see their speakers. Go ahead and advance to the next one. Oh, that's you. I'd like to certainly introduce our guests, and they'll each talk a little bit about themselves and their company, and then we'll begin to open it up for questions. And I'll just let them introduce themselves. That might just be easier. So we'll start with you, James.
Good evening. I'm James Goebel. Apparently the company name's more important than mine, so that's probably appropriate.
You made the slides.
Well, that was somebody else at Menlo, so they clearly understood. My background is a computer scientist as an undergraduate, went back to school and got an MBA. And now I'm an entrepreneur, and we consider Menlo a startup even though we're 10 years in, because if it's no longer a startup, I have to quit so I can go work somewhere else that is a startup. And what Menlo works on is really the design of a product that has a software component in it. And the key to it is whether or not we can make sure that we design the product the way that the users think. Because there are lots of cool technologies, a lot of really great stuff that can solve problems, but then you put it in the hands of the user, and the user can't use it. And unfortunately, having training classes and lots of materials for them to study usually isn't the answer, because the products that we build for them are not things they're going to use every hour of every day. It's going to be something they use for a little bit to solve a problem and then go back to some other problem. And the idea of going and taking a long training class that's usually separated from when they actually have to use it. So instead we kind of flip it around. We don't want a training class for the user. We want a training class for the product. So Menlo's high-tech anthropologists go out and study the users, then take what they know about the users and try and design that back into the product and work with the product engineers to say, I know that's not the way you think it should work, but that's the way a user thinks it should work. And maybe if we build it that way, the product will actually be able to deliver value in the end. And so that's kind of the crux of what we do. We've worked in all sorts of different domains. We worked on the organ transplant information system for the University Hospital. We did some work for some Hygeia in the local community. And then the poster child, of course, is Accuray, who we're very proud of and have been partners with from day one. And then there's the important slide with the picture that shows I no longer have as much hair as I thought I did. And important things like I'm a certified project manager, mostly so I can understand what project managers do and why I need them, and then have them actually do the work. Otherwise, let's go on to something more important.
Ted.
Really? Hi, I'm Ted Dacko, and I'm now an independent consultant, and I run a company called Arbor Dakota Consulting, and I work with small technology startups. About me, I grew up in a steel town. I'm a C student in high school, so there's nothing in my background that should say that I should have anything that's to do with either entrepreneurship or information technology and healthcare. I did go to, I was a math major in college, and mathematics taught me to think both logically and creatively. I don't use mathematics in my background anymore, but I do use the disciplines that I learned in mathematics, even though I don't use the material anymore. I hate working in a big company. I started my career at General Electric, and when I sold my recent company to Johnson & Johnson, those were bookend reminders that I just despise working in a big company. I've had just about every job you can have in a software company, and I have now run 6 different software companies. The health media story. This is a fascinating story, but it's not necessarily about. It's certainly not about me. Vic Strecker was a professor at the University of Michigan, and Vic became fascinated with the idea. He knew that in any area of health, no matter whether you're trying to lose weight, quit smoking, manage diabetes, or deal with depression, you had fundamentally two choices. One, you could go see a counselor, face-to-face or telephonic. You could talk to somebody. Or two, somebody would hand you a brochure. The brochure ended up being shoveled onto the internet, called a content website, but content websites are nothing more than brochures shoveled online. The counselor worked, but was very expensive to deliver. The brochure didn't do anything for you, but was cheap to deliver. And he became fascinated by the concept, can I, if I tailor that brochure for James, can I goose the efficacy rate of that brochure? So he had a lab at the University of Michigan. He went out and got government funding, and he did research studies in a whole bunch of therapeutic categories. And he found out two very important things. Number one, if you tailor the content of the brochure around motivation, self-confidence, demographics, and some other things, you could goose the efficacy rate. And two, the more you tailor the brochure, the higher the efficacy rate goes. When I say brochure, also I guess I should be really saying content sites. So he spun out, when he got published, his results were published, and he started going around giving speeches at all the major healthcare conferences around the country. And people would rush up to him afterwards and say, Vic, this is fascinating. Where can I buy this? And say, you can't. I could support 150 people in a lab across Bushilda, Michigan. You have 4.5 million members. I can't help you. But he used the dot-com era to spin off the idea of health media. Rick Snyder was his first venture capitalist. They set up the organization. And Vic ran the company for the first couple of years, and he brought in somebody else, and I followed them. That's not the important part of this story. The part of the story that's very, very interesting is that we invented a brand new category of market called digital coaching. It had the efficacy of a coach, and it had the cost structure of a website, but it was very important for us to actually invent a brand new category because people kept thinking we were WebMD, and we weren't WebMD or Dr. Coop or whoever, name your favorite content site. Number two, we sold on outcomes because no one knew, because we were in a category by ourselves, and everything in healthcare is related to outcomes. We had to collect all the information on each individual participant, and we had to know for every given customer, whether, not only for the customer, by demographic category, by whatever, we had to know the outcomes of each and every person and then be able to aggregate them together. So data was hugely important. And three, in order to keep our contracts going with our customers, we had to make sure participation rates across all of our programs were high, which meant that we had to mine that individual data that we got from the participant, think about it, and spit it back to them to recruit them into other programs or recruit them back into the existing program. So the idea was, it was a very sophisticated application, but it was a blue ocean strategy concept. We were able to invent a category that never existed before. We sold on outcomes, and the data was hugely important around that. And in order to drive participation, we also had to use that data in order to keep people engaged in the program. Health Media is now a Johnson & Johnson company, which is one of the reasons why I am no longer an employee. As a matter of fact, it's not even called Health Media anymore. As of January 1st, Johnson & Johnson changed the name of the organization to Wellness and Prevention. If Johnson & Johnson acquired Apple, they would have renamed it Computers and Phones.
Peter. Good evening. My name is Pete Wingard. I'm the CTO of Compendia Bioscience. Little background on me, I've been at Compendia for about 5 years now. My focus really since being there has been on our data infrastructure, our data management, computation, and analysis and visualization. So what Compendia does, which is really the next slide, but just so you know if you're not familiar with Compendia, we have a very large database of cancer genomic data. We have about 60,000 gene profiles on 60,000 cancer patients. And what we do is we deliver answers to our customers who are largely the top 20 pharma. And we also offer the product available for free to academic customers. And so why do people use this product? They use it to answer questions about genes in the context of cancer. Which genes are important? Cancer is a genomic disease. The reason we have tumors, or the reason we can get tumors, is something goes wrong in a cell. There's some genetic defect. And from a treatment perspective, it's important for us to identify and understand what those genetic defects are and then target treatment towards them. That's what we're trying to do today with cancer therapy. That's not necessarily how all cancer therapy works today, but there's a belief held by many that that's where it's going. And that genomic data is going to be vitally important to characterizing cancer as a disease and characterizing the treatments and understanding what the treatments actually target. So we work with a lot of data. And my background has nothing to do with biology or cancer or life sciences. Got a bachelor in electrical engineering, which, like Ted, I haven't really used in my life, but there's a discipline you learn there in a way of thinking and an approach to problem solving, which I found very useful. And I sort of have a mix of of research and commercial backgrounds. Early in my career, working at a couple of research institutes, National Center for Atmospheric Research, and then the Institute for Research and Coordination of Acoustics and Music in Paris. And then started up a company in Ann Arbor, which was a commercial venture. So I feel really lucky to be at Compendia because it's kind of a mix of both worlds. So again, I mentioned a little bit about Compendia, but our mission is to cure cancer with genomic data. It's actually a University of Michigan tech transfer story. It was developed in the Chennai lab at the University of Michigan. And it was led by our co-founder and CEO, Dan Rhodes. It's led to many important discoveries in cancer. Namely, there's many. A couple are AMACR and SPINK1 were a couple of genes that were discovered to be important in prostate cancer. Also, Oncomine was used to discover gene fusions in prostate cancer, which was an important moment in cancer history because it had been thought previously that gene fusions were only involved in blood cancers, and never been seen before in solid tumors. So Oncomine was sort of developed in this really interesting environment where discoveries were being made in the lab and important discoveries that were being published and driving research worldwide. And Oncomine was really developed from necessity. And the problem is that you can only do so many experiments in a lab. You only have so many people. You only have so many chemicals. You only have so much money. And as the Chennai lab was making discoveries, you want to validate them. You don't want just one data point. You don't want to find one thing and believe it's true everywhere. You want to validate it. So you can run a whole bunch of experiments. Or what Dan set out to do was to realize that there's lots of data out there available in the public domain. Other labs, other researchers running experiments, and then as part of the requirements of publication, having to make all that data available. So Dan set out to gather all of that data, bring it together into one large database, and then be able to ask questions of it. And it was through that process, which started out with one data set, then 5 data sets, then 10 data sets, that grew into the product that's Oncomine. And today we have over 625 data sets and 60,000 samples. And we've gone beyond collecting microarray data from mRNA experiments to collecting DNA copy number data, next generation sequencing data now, and mutation data, which is generated from a variety of experimental platforms. We're at a little over 21,000 users today. We're nearing our 6th anniversary, and we're hiring. We are growing this year, which is exciting. In terms of products, it all started with Oncomine, but we've sort of evolved over the year from being a pure subscription software business to today. We see ourselves and positioned ourselves as sort of pharma's cancer genomics partner and are offering a more complete suite of products to answer many questions. I had no idea I did that. That's neat. This is a slide that's never been shown before. We've never really broken our company down in this way. But this is all about the data that we work with. And the last slide is really about delivering. And our goal is to deliver answers to customers. Our customers have lots of questions. Tell me about important targets. I'm a drug company. I want to develop a new drug. Tell me what the important, interesting targets are in bladder cancer or colorectal cancer. I have a drug, but I'm not sure where I should take it to in the clinic. we have a service that will take your drug and come back with that answer. And all these answers that we come up with are generated from the data. And we've created a process to do this that I've listed a lot of the verbs, which are to first identify. We are constantly looking out to identify data available in the public domain that we can bring in that can help us answer questions. We collect it, which is a big challenge. Multiple types of data: mutation data, mRNA expression data, DNA copy number data, next generation sequencing data, multiple data formats, and multiple sources. We curate that data. One of the challenges of aggregating data from multiple sources is that it's different. What one lab calls grade 3, another lab calls grade III. But we want to be able to answer questions about all grade 3 data. So we have developed an ontology that really defines all of the terms involved in cancer. And as we bring data sets in, we have to map all of these terms to that ontology. And it's an enormous challenge. And it's as we get more and more experience working with customers, oftentimes that's the most astonishing thing to them. Is not the answers, not our fancy UIs, not all that stuff, but just like, really? How did you get all this data and make it computable? So we actually have a dedicated team that works on that full time. So that's really on the metadata side, information about the samples, clinical outcomes, any lab tests that were run on the samples, the cancer type, and so on and so forth. We also have to deal with all the high throughput data, all the microarray data and next generation sequencing data. And there we have a similar problem, which is that in the lab, everybody uses a different experimental platform. We work with RT-PCR data, microarray data. There's lots of different microarray chips. But again, we want to be able to put all this data together and answer questions in a big way. So we have had to develop techniques to, we have to know about all these platforms. We have to know what all the assays on the platforms are measuring. We have to be able to bring it together and make all that data computable. That's a normalization step. Then finally, we analyze. There's lots of questions that you want to ask. We ask about, I think, because of our ontology and all these standardized terms, we run a standard suite of analyses across all of our data. And I think we're up to a little over 3,000 standard analyses that we run across all of our data. Every time we add a new data set, those analyses are run against that new data. And so the analyses I'm talking about are questions like, which genes are more expressed in bladder cancer versus normal bladder tissue? What copy number aberrations do we see at what frequencies in small cell lung cancer? Those kind of questions that we can pre-compute and then put all those results into a big database, which allows us to go to the next step, which is mining this data. And in a vague sense, I guess, data mining is, the purpose of it is just to expand our knowledge about cancer, about drugs, and about patients. So one of the things we've done to mine our data is we've identified the patterns of gene expression in different cancer types. And so, for example, in breast cancer, we have a diagnostic out that's a result of our ability to mine this data. We found that there's 20 variables of breast cancer. One of the things to know about cancer as well is that everybody's tumor is different. But if you have enough samples together, you begin to see patterns emerge. So by applying some data mining techniques, we've identified 20 key variables in breast cancer and developed an assay that measures those 20 variables. And it's our theory that if you're measuring those variables that matter, you ought to be able to predict outcomes, drug response, and everything else. So we're working with pharmaceutical companies to actually run these diagnostics as part of clinical trials so that in addition to getting the outcome of did the patient live and for how long, we can also correlate those outcomes with the underlying genomic patterns. Visualizing, I mean, this is the way now we can start getting closer to delivering answers. So we're talking about huge amounts of data. It's multidimensional. And so being able to visualize this stuff is really important. From a visualization standpoint, I mean, almost every question needs a different visualization. So being able to quickly change axes, look down different dimensions is very important. So although we have a standard set of products that sort of provide some degree of configuration of visualizations, internally when we're working on research projects, we need the ability to generate visualizations very quickly. And then finally, deliver. what we've learned over the years is that you need to deliver your answers or deliver the data in whatever format makes the most sense for your customers. So sometimes we're delivering raw data. Sometimes we're delivering software. Sometimes we're delivering services. And so that's our delivery phase. So as a whole, that's what we do. Our challenges today in terms of big data, the microarray is really the technology. It's about 10 or 12 years old that made this possible. One microarray sample might be a couple megabytes of data. Today, the world's going towards next generation sequencing, which is 10,000 to 100,000 fold larger in terms of sample size. So today, we can rebuild all of Oncomine on one computer, and it takes less than a day. We're going to have to do a lot of work to figure out how to recompute. And one of the initiatives we're working on this year is the Cancer Genome Atlas Project, 10,000 cancer samples. And each sample is going to take we got it down to about 30 hours to process. So 10,000 compute days. I mean, we don't have 10,000 days to get these answers, so we're going to have to figure out a way to do it, to rise this compute challenge.
Thank you. So we've assembled a kind of a wide team of, or a panel for you guys, everything from discovery to healthcare to contract work or individual work. So we'll open this up to Q&A, but I'll start with the first question, which is, what are your thoughts on when to use to develop software or IT talent in-house versus when to go outside? And we'll start with James since you're closer. And I'm guessing the answer is outside always.
You always go outside. Yeah, always go to Menlo and ask them. They'll tell you the answer. And part of it depends also on how long your need's going to be, right? So often organizations first ask whether they should be inside or outside, and what they probably should start with is, how long do we need the resources? And is there a big bulge of work and then it tails off? Because all too often what happens, we see with a lot of companies, is they have a huge bolus of work they have to do, but they hire a team for the steady state, and that team is behind forever, right? And everybody else in the organization is frustrated with them, and they continually play the shuffle game of what's next, what's next, what's next, and everybody always feels it's behind. Now, the challenge is if you hire an all-outside firm, then in the long term, how do you manage to maintain your intellectual capital and build that out? And so the answer is probably something more creative in between, in my mind, but that also means you have to build a really good working relationship. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective.
Any other comments?
I'll take it. I think what we believe is that you really something that's core to your business. You should really have the capability to develop and maintain in-house. I know at Compendia it's incredibly important to have a lot of interactions amongst all of our team. Our software developers need to be sitting next to the scientists. They need to be part of that workflow. The fact that we've got people answering questions for on a services basis. At some point, you might imagine that if we get that question asked enough, we're going to make it part of our product. So the fact that these questions are being answered and are being asked and answered near where the software that is being developed is important to us. We used Menlo services very effectively a few years ago as a capacity enhancement strategy. We were able to increase our velocity to develop software by enhancing our internal team with Menlo. And the fact that we were only a couple blocks from each other really helped a lot. But I'd add another question. I think it's important that you ask whether or not you have to develop software. And I think one of the things we realized is that at the beginning we thought we had to. And then we realized that we were really in a data business and that we needed to be able to deliver that data lots of ways. One of those ways was through software. But are there tools out there that we can use that are good enough to deliver those answers to our customers? Which in some cases we found to be true. We were able to do that.
So many of the people here may not come from more software backgrounds, and so I thought since we have service and software as a service, both models, explaining to the audience and the viewers out in internet land, how do you guys make money?
We had a subscription model, so we had products in the marketplace. We sold to health plans and employers fundamentally, and it was basically what's called a per member per month. Number of employees or members that the plan had, there was a fee, and based on the number of products that they licensed from us, we ran the whole thing on not on ours, but we contracted with a firm to run the services for them. But it was a classic subscription model, which is obviously the way the software world is going. It creates both defensible and recurring revenues, and that's how we did it.
So Menlo, as a software partner, traditional model is either you do a fixed bid for a project or hourly for every hour you do work, and we're an hourly shop, but we recognize that puts a distance between us and the customer. And so what we do, and we seek to do with all of our customers, is we actually try a model that does shared risk, shared reward. So our customers typically pay us half of our rates in cash and the other half in stock in their company or royalty on the product. So that if that product never actually comes to fruition and doesn't actually succeed in the marketplace, we're not going to see the other half of the money. As you can imagine, that makes us very interested in making sure that the product succeeds, so much so that I think some of our customers are surprised at how much we'll fight with them when we think their answers are wrong.
And for Compendia, we're software and services with a wee bit of IP licensing.
Wayne, let's try to use the microphone too as well so that everyone can hear.
How do you protect your software position?
Position or intellectual property?
Intellectual property. Typically, you don't copyright, I presume, because that would open it up to everybody would have access to it. So do you just hold this as trade secret, or how do you do it?
I can tell our story. We've been fortunate to not really have too many competitors because we're filling a very narrow niche. But there have been competitors that have come along. And one competitor actually launched and came on our radar at a conference. We went and looked at their website and we're like, oh my God, this looks really similar. And went back and come to find out that they had all registered for our free version months and months prior. So, I mean, that's just a story to say, I don't know what you can do to protect against that. What we found as we ended up being head-to-head with them in some accounts was that we won some and lost some. And in our case, when we lost some, they came back to us because they realized that with our specific focus on oncology, and because of the fact that we were delivering not answers across all disease areas, but the answers to questions that are oncology specific that the other product couldn't do, because we were so specific that there was no choice. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
our intellectual property was two things. If you recall what I said, Vic figured out a way to emulate a health coaching session, but there was no coach. So he built, or the software engineers that he hired built an incredibly sophisticated and powerful engine which allowed us to build products on top of the engine. And I don't think anyone had ever thought about it before, but the way the products work is we interact with you, and based on what you tell us, we actually almost handwrite a plan for you that can be somewhere between 18 and 24 web pages. There is no such thing as that. And the only reason it was built is because there was a need, and the only reason there was a need is because Vic picked up the need. So there is no such thing, and there was no way to copy the underlying engine, and there was no way to copy even the products on top of it, because every single person gets an absolutely unique plan, and I don't know how people would do that. Second part of the intellectual property is what do you actually coach them on based on Vic's research? Is it demographics? Is it motivation? Is it self-confidence? Is it perceived barriers, etc.? So even if they were able to copy the technology, what they were supposed to be writing the technology towards was still a trade secret of health media. So there was zero chance that we would have ever been picked off.
So let me start with, I'm not an attorney, since we're videotaping. Menlo doesn't retain intellectual property. We do work as a service. We transfer all the intellectual property to the customer, because if they don't own that, they can't get acquired by a large company, say on the West Coast, and turn our stock into money, right? So we want them to own the intellectual property. But there's the other half that I can speak to, which is I think that there's an awful lot of software teams that are confused about intellectual property because they will borrow code off of the internet or include components of unknown origin, right? And one of the things that we're very careful because of our business strategy is to make sure we know the status of everything we include in the system. So if you just go find code on the internet and copy it off and put it in, and wow, that works and it solves our problem, you have a new author potentially, and good luck if they find that and then want to claim against you later. So intellectual property starts pretty early in the process, and not all programmers are completely clued into what that means.
I'm wondering, particularly from the compendia model, how do you deal with the disruptive changes in the science to, 10 years ago it was going to be genetic mutations, then it's copy number variants, then it's the epigenetic modification. And does that create a lot of waves between your programming and database people and the scientists? Because it's sort of like, you told us this was the way it is, but now it isn't anymore.
That's a good question. We work in a field that's changing every day, every month. However, as you were asking that question, I realized, why don't we have that problem more? I think one of the reasons is our software and data are really reference tools. So we're providing scientific researchers with data for them to make their own conclusions. So what we've done is we try to collect as much of the data as we can, mutation data, gene expression data, DNA copy number data. We don't do too much epigenetic data today, and I think that's mainly because there's a belief internally in our company that there haven't been too many major important druggable discoveries through the epigenome, although that's changing now with next generation sequencing data and us having higher resolution on the genome. So, right, we told you something yesterday that turned out not to be true. With our data collection, we keep up, and we always are trying to present the most relevant analyses for scientists and their own interpretations. But in our services, I suppose we could run into that problem. I think we're always, when we're doing a target discovery project, sometimes companies come to us and say, tell us everything you know about prostate cancer. And they know that when we're doing that, they know exactly what data went into that analysis. So they know, and if there was a discovery that was made, it may or not have been considered when we gave that analysis. So I think we communicate really well with our customers on services project.
As an outsider who's worked with compendia, I think maybe the answer is even simpler. They work as a team. Mm-hmm. So I don't, if you went there, it's not like there's the database guys on one floor, the programmers on another floor, the biologists on another floor. If you walked in and you didn't know everybody, it wouldn't be clear who was in which role for quite a while to you. And I think that being on the same team, even though they have different expertise, makes a huge difference in that particular case.
I would also think that the increasing volume and complexity of the data would create a further demand for your service, because you're essentially a data aggregator. Right. I think researchers who have expertise in sequencing or microarrays or whatnot, that is, nobody's using the full gamut of available analytical techniques. And so if you could aggregate them, if you're a one-stop shopping kind of facility, I think the more complexity, the better it is for your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think, again, when people buy our products, it's because there's nothing else like it. They can't get all the data in one place. Yeah.
So, I guess software is more unique and, or has its own challenges. And I was going to get you guys to talk about adoption of your technology. Going in, certainly with compendia and research universities and big pharma, which are two completely separate, and certainly Ted can talk about the difficulties with the healthcare system and getting insurance companies and employers and those sort of things, who are notoriously feet draggers, so to speak, in terms of getting things done. So adoption of technology to anyone.
At the consumer level or at the customer level? Because we were a B2B2C organization.
Well, I was thinking more B2B or whomever you view your customer as.
Okay. Well, that was it was difficult at the beginning, but once we explained what digital coaching was, it was massive. We had customers all over the globe. We had 9 Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, Kaiser Permanente, Aetna, Johnson & Johnson. eBay was a customer. They recognized that we were doing something that was as sophisticated as they were. Ace Hardware, Snyder's Potato Chip. So it was adopted extremely well once we had the proven outcomes and we created the category and created demand for the category.
Adoption on our end, a couple of things come to mind. One, we have 20,000 academic users that oftentimes end up in pharma. So oftentimes these people have written their PhD theses and used Oncomine a lot. So they bring with them sort of the knowledge of how to use our technology. And I was just telling Wes earlier about a story that happened recently. Our champion at one customer left and went to a biotech, and the first thing she did was say, "You don't have Oncomine?" And so they bought it. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is sometimes customers will give us a try. I'm thinking about our Onco Predictor product where we claim that we can help identify biomarkers of sensitivity and resistance to your drug and help you identify patient populations to go into in clinical trial with or without a companion biomarker strategy, just based on enrichment in that population of the biomarkers of sensitivities and a low frequency of the biomarkers of resistance, which seems like a pretty easy concept, but not many people are doing that when they're trying to figure out where to go with their drug. And so sometimes they give us a try, and maybe it could be in a drug that they're already in the clinic with. And we often get many repeat business after we found everything they already knew about their drug and more.
So what we often see is that people who fully bake their solution, they have their vision, they build the product, and then they release it, and they're surprised because the rest of the world doesn't see their vision quite the same way. So our goal with our clients is to get some version of working product or even paper prototypes out with real users and go study them in their own environment. The earlier you get that feedback, assuming you can actually hear it, because so often people discard the feedback when it doesn't match what they expect. And I'm not saying just go ask all the users what they want and do it all, but to go test your assumptions as early and as often as possible so that when you're ready to launch the product, it's pretty obvious how people will react because you've already tested it.
Continuing on with that with testing and for people in the pharma space are used to clinical trials and those sort of things, and you guys in software tend to beta test things and those sort of things. So explain about your products and beta testing and getting the with health media, getting those first set of users or getting people to run to get the data to be able to prove to people that they should buy it, or certainly on the Compendia side to prove that they have a strong enough data set in order to run their own experiments off of. And then getting back to Michael's question about change. In today's process, as you change your products as well, how do you continue to test those? A lot of questions there, I know.
I could say at Compendia beta testing, increasingly our customers are beta testing for us. I mean almost immediately. What I mean by that is we sometimes deliver to a subset of our customers who have sort of identified themselves as just hungry for all of the data and analyses that we can produce, and who have become collaborators. They're often seeing prototypes of our products at the same time that our scientists internally are. So, there's a high tolerance in our business that's, I think, taken a lot of the different types of people at Compendia, from engineers to scientists to the business types, something to get used to, which is that it's okay if it's not 100% correct. That in our space, it's more important that as we are able to achieve these novel data integrations and apply these important analyses and grow, that get the data out there, and another thing about our audience is that they're always skeptical. So even if they see something in the data, they're not going to believe it unless they can validate it, and if they can't, they've found a bug.
Well, at Health Media, we had 3 levels of testing that had to get done. First of all, every product, well, consider every consumer had their own website. They could take a health media program, and then they got a plan written specifically for them down to the detailed level. First of all, did the website work? Second of all, now imagine the complexity of this. There were an infinite number of possible combinations of text that you can put on, so you can't fully 100% test that. So obviously that was a very, very mechanized process, but you had to make sure that it actually said it spoke English and it spoke proper English and also was working. And then the third level of testing was, is the product producing the outcome? Are people losing weight? Are they stopping smoking? Are their A1C levels going down? Are depression levels going down, et cetera? And that took a minimum of 6 months from the time you launched the product, because we would do pre and post test on them. So it would normally be 9 to 12 months before we could actually say, yes, this product is certified and actually is producing the results that we want, but that's where the data came into play, collecting it and then analyzing it and make sure that it was working for all segments of the population.
The longer that your software team develops software without a real user touching it, the greater your risk. And so they're being really productive, leave us alone, come back in a few weeks. That's a bad sign. I know from being a developer, it feels productive. At Menlo, we've taken the strategy that if our customer doesn't come in once a week and put their hands on the keyboard and test what we're doing and give us feedback, then we're in trouble. And so we literally set up our process that such if they don't come in and do that, we stop work on their project and go work on everybody else's. So we make a very bold declaration that customers will show up and play because the risk is so high, because the programmers will write the code the way they understand it, and if they test it, they'll test it the way they understand it, and there's nothing quite like having a real user who has a real purpose, typing real data in to actually show you if it's working.
Yeah, we'll make it walk, sorry. Health media, maybe you said this and I missed it. Do you have experts on the keyboards catering each one of these cases to the individual, or is it artificial intelligence, or how is that being used?
The question was, do we have experts? Actually, there's no people intervention at all when we're dealing with the consumer. It's all done through technology. So it was, I don't know that I would consider it artificial intelligence, but you might consider it one massive rules engine that is generating output based on how a series of questions were answered. But that's how it was done. It was somewhere between. It wasn't quite AI, but it was a gigantic rules engine.
Did it learn?
No, it was taught by a combination of a health educator, a behavioral scientist, a computer scientist, and a graphic designer. But it did not learn anything about the consumer unless the health educator went back in and taught it.
Yeah, I'm wondering, very often when you're dealing with large amounts of data, the data is useful, but what's really important is having somebody who either has a slightly warped view of reality or is the disruptive thinker who picks up on what everybody else doesn't. How do you look for that person?
We always talked about the fact that you torture the data until it talks to you and tells you what you want to hear. And so you're basically looking for a CIA operative that can waterboard the data.
In the case of Compendia, that's a really good question. And what pops into mind is these PowerPoint slides you see at big pharma conferences where dollars spent on R&D going up and up and up and up, and number of approved, or some other line that's not going up as much that represents revenue in some way. And so there's a big gap. What's going on? We're spending more. We should know more. We should be making more money. And I think there is a lot of dollars being spent, but you can spend a lot of time mucking around with data, but you're asking the wrong questions. And I think at Compendia, we benefited a lot from our founder's vision for really how this data can be applied to, and how it can't be applied to the question of cancer genomics and understanding cancer and characterizing drugs. and I've learned a lot working with Dan. And I guess one other thing I'll say is that one of the things I've learned is that it's often the simplest thing that works, and I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for that. And the more data you have, the more the pitchforks in the haystack stick out. So I think we kind of apply these very simple data analyses on big data, and we're finding interesting things that people and our customers have been struggling with for a long time.
It takes a keen sense of curiosity. I actually did a lot of data analysis myself, even as the CEO of the company. But it really, I think I'm supporting what you're saying, but it really takes someone who constantly has the question, I wonder if, or I wonder what would happen, etc., and just constantly interrogating, and then that may not lead you to the ultimate answer, but it leads you to the next question, that ultimately gets you to some ultimate answer. But finding people who have that, who will sit there for hours and be fascinated by what they are learning from exploring the data.
Another overly simple answer is if you want to have people have different perspective about a big data set, don't hire people who all think the same way, right? Don't hire all the same degrees. Don't hire people all from the same university. Don't hire people all for the same job. Don't hire people who all know each other. Make sure you have diversity on your team. Compendia doesn't have a team with everybody with the same degrees, right? There is diversity on that team. You never know when the electrical engineer is going to say, well, isn't this an odd pattern? I don't know what it means, but there's an odd pattern here.
Uh-oh, a data guy's going to ask this question. This is not good.
Asking you to speculate a bit, what might be some of the biggest software opportunities to make better health care more affordable that aren't widely recognized?
Ask that again, Curtis.
What might be some of the biggest opportunities where you can use software to make better health care more affordable?
I'm going to take notes.
All right, I'll jump into the crazy void. So on one of my favorite topics, I think we need to exploit HIPAA. HIPAA, in my understanding, is about your personal access to your records. Yeah, there's the privacy part too, but first and foremost, you have access to your data. Who knows the most about you? Maybe you're not a scientist. Well, in this case, this room is probably a skewed population. But how many people don't have their own data? They don't see the pattern, right? They don't have their own blood pressures. Imagine if each individual had an easy way to access their own records and look at it and not know it, but just be able to ask questions about it. Because each one of us, hopefully, is the best care tender of our own needs. And I think that's a huge gap in what I see going on.
My answer might, I don't know if it's overly simplistic or what, but 75 to 80% of healthcare costs are preventable. I should just end the answer right there. So using it on why is that preventable and how do you the fact that we're spending so much time and effort focusing on administrative sort of issues when 80% of the costs are preventable by the people like us. The answer, I think, is in that. And, my old company, Health Media, that's exactly what the focus was. But if you stop the preventable expenditures, there's plenty of money to go around for everybody from the poor uninsured to the very, very elderly. So the answer is somewhere in there, I think.
That's a good question. I'm so focused on cancer that I'm gonna see if I don't think much about issues outside of it. But to bring it back to cost, one of the things that we are striving towards is trying to find the right drugs for the right patients, and to not waste time, which turns into lives and money, on necessarily providing the standard of care and then waiting for that to fail, and then moving on to something else. So there is an opportunity there to and it's a big data opportunity to try to answer that question: what drug should this patient be taking? And when you mentioned HIPAA and patient records, one of the challenges we're going to have in the near future is that in the clinic, it's going to become more affordable for pathology departments to sequence people's tissue, whether it be for cancer, which will be an early application of this because of the genomic nature of the disease. And we'll figure out how to analyze all that data and everything, but we're going to have to contextualize those aberrations because we'll find that every tumor has hundreds, if not thousands of aberrations, but it's going to be important to figure out which ones are the ones that are driving that tumor. So we need to, and today we have 60,000 tumors, which is great. And I wish I knew the number off the top of my head. I feel like I should. But there's a heck of a lot more than 60,000 cancer cases a year in the U.S. It's probably millions. So we think we have a big data problem at Compendia. We don't when we start talking about the clinical applications of this, where there's going to be hundreds of thousands of patients being run. And to contextualize those mutations, those aberrations, and figure out which ones are the drivers, we're going to have to analyze all that data. And then to look at the outcomes, we're going to have all that data. And I remember one thing that Eric Lander, who's the director of the Broad, recently talked about, which is you could see him express a little bit of frustration at the fact that it may be privacy laws that prevent us from gaining access to those patients' genomic profiles. But at the same time, that's the wrong way of thinking about it, because if many of these patients who are in late-stage treatment may be dying, that may be the biggest gift they want to give back is for their data to maybe help us one day. So we're going to have to, in his words, we're going to have to figure out a way to stop thinking that way.
I kind of jogged my own curiosity. We started talking about artificial intelligence. At Compendia, you're talking about all the data gathering, which is more the back end of it. Excuse me. Are you focusing, or what percent of your company is focusing on an AI part of it, a Watson or something like that kind of looks at the questions to ask and kind of learns and evolves itself about the latest trends in data analysis or conclusions?
Yeah, the shorter answer is none. We do, but and I think that's because and I can't really think of any applications for that. Maybe I'm just being narrow-minded in my thinking.
So, I mean, you had a lot of summary of personalization. Do you guys all feel that there's going to be a greater push towards personalization? We talked about personalization of changing your I guess your treatment of things. We talk about leading closer to personalization of finding the right, based on the genetic sequence of your tumor, what the best treatment of. Do you think we're moving more, the more data we have, that's where we're going towards personalized medicine?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what health media is doing, personalized medicine. And with cancer, I think that's the direction we're all trying to go.
How close are we?
There's a clinical trial at the University of Michigan right now where I'm not sure what they're up to now, but I think a couple of dozen patients have been sequenced. And this is something that Rule actually talks about as he does the conference circuit, and it's a program that he's running at the University of Michigan. So it's an exciting future. You can imagine the tumor board, right? And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I think that oncologists often get together to discuss cases and tap everybody's knowledge to figure out what we should do with this patient, what clinical trial should they be involved with. And in that case, there's another couple people sitting at the table, and one is a genomics expert who has the results of the genomic screen, and the other person, as I understand it, is a genetic counselor. And I think their role is to talk about issues of how do you talk to patients about the genetic findings and so on and so forth. But the interesting role is the genomics counselor. And so if there's 5 trials they could be enrolled in, and if the decision was, let's put them on that trial because it's for bladder cancer, now armed with the knowledge about what mutations that patient has, a better clinical trial may be prescribed. And that's new, and that's important.
Your question is probably the answer to Curtis's question. Personalized medicine is the best opportunity for technology in the healthcare field because it was each one of our answers, whether it was a personal health record to genetic sequencing to teaching them how to behave. So you use technology to work with individuals to try to help prevent them from getting sick. But if they get sick for whatever reason, whether it's, whatever, then you use the personalized medicine to try to treat them and make them better, and then give them personalized access to their own records, so they could learn more. And we stopped trying to treat everybody with vanilla solutions.
One last question.
How has the regulatory environment affected how you develop your product or do your process?
We're all preclinical today, so it hasn't affected us much. I guess there are. I guess that's not entirely true. We do treat certain types of data that has certain security requirements, and so we do have an IT infrastructure that allows us to adhere to those rules. But by and large, we don't have any approval processes we have to go through. Even for our diagnostic, we envision a day where that is being used in the clinic, but we've sort of chosen a technology path that will carry us there without us necessarily having to go through the approval process all on our own.
In our organization, when we work on regulatory projects, one of the goals I have working with our team is to not simply implement the processes that are required by the folks in regulatory, but to understand them. And then to ask, how could we actually potentially achieve the goal as opposed to just following the rote process and signing off the form, but understand why, and then offer potential solutions that could be even more effective, because there are real goals behind this, not just the instant engineer answer of, oh, more paper pushing.
So my smart aleck response would be, it depends on whether the Democrats or the Republicans win the election. But for every rule and regulation, you realize that you are probably doing something that's going to hinder personalized medicine, because you violate a right. When somebody's right gets violated when you do something, when you try to do good. And I know you asked it from a government perspective, but there's also just the individual hospital perspective. I think we should end with you telling the story that you told me when we started, because that's a good answer to his question.
Okay, so in recent history, I was admitted to the University Hospital in the ER. I had a kidney stone. The ER did not have room for me. They put me on a gurney. And working in IT, while I was not fully cognizant at the time, I understood when they wheeled me into the hallway that they had a problem. So the nurse would come take care of me, and I was now the patient under, the description was whatever the painting was that was hanging near my gurney, right? And the rule was, near as I could tell, you can't write things on paper anymore. You have to use the terminal that's provided in each room. I'm not in a room. So what did the nurse do? She can't write it on paper because that's the rule. So she would come take my vitals and write it on her hand. She would then go off to the computer terminal somewhere, do work, write more stuff on her hand, come back and deal with me, because she had to follow the rules. Right? And unfortunately, I was patient X plus 1, and they were only set up to handle X because some engineers thought, oh, this will work just fine. I just hoped they had the gurney next to me.
And we'll leave it at that. I'd like to thank our guests tonight. And next meeting on regulatory will be on March 14th here. So thank you all for coming.